6 months ago, my dad booted me, 18M, so my half-brother Derek, 24M, could move back home. Unlike other adults, he did not wish to rent his own house. Hence, my dad naturally felt I had to move to create room for his family and himself. Derek is the kid of my dad from past marriage. Early on, his mom and dad divorced up soon after he was born. Therefore, their bond was not very strong. Still, Derek grew up spending more time at our house than was legally allowed by their custody agreement. Over the years, he grew really close to my dad, far closer than I ever was. Though Derek wasn't exactly kind to me, my mother, who died a few years ago following a protracted cancer fight, always attempted to make him welcome. From what I know, Derek considered me a competitor even back then. Things were tolerable when my mom was still around. He was older, stronger, and had an aura about him that always made me feel like I didn't belong. She was my buffer. My dad never appeared to genuinely care about me. She attempted to preserve the peace. She stood up for me when Derek started routinely bullying me. He made my life unpleasant both at home and at the university, pushed me around, denigrated me, and nothing my dad said to stop it worked. Looking back, that wasn't normal or okay, but at the time I believed maybe that's what my dad wanted from me, to toughen up and cope with it. When I would grumble, he would urge me to screw it up. I made it through. Not wanting to give my dad any opportunity to shout at me, I stayed silent and refrained from fighting back. Knowing he had the advantage, Derek made use of it. He bullied differently as we became older. Rather than physically roughing me, he began focusing his pals on me. Derek was already in high school when I started middle school. His friends and he set out to make my life miserable. They made me the punching bag for the school, passed rumors, called me names, and my social life started to slide rapidly. The stories Derek and his buddies had created caused even young classmates from elementary school to avoid me. It wasn't until Derek graduated that I finally got some peace at school. Things at home were just as horrible as ever. The golden position Derek had with my dad never changed. From his perspective, he was the football star, a decent student, and essentially the ideal son. Conversely, I was constantly made to feel ordinary, unimportant, and plainly unwelcome. Only my mother ever really cared about me. When she went away, everything fell apart. My bond with my dad vanished. He hardly spoke to me, and when he did, it was usually to urge me to clean the house or scold me. We were both hurting, so I attempted to give him space. Unfortunately, instead of pulling together during that trying period, my dad totally turned away from me. I began to feel as though I went unseen to him. Once my mother left, the house stopped feeling like home. I really felt like I was living with a stranger, whether he ignored me or attacked me. It became a home I just lived in, tiptoeing around my dad's moods and finishing all the housework, counting down the days until I could head off to college and away from the continual negativity was helping me. 6 months ago, my dad sat me down and informed me that Derek, his wife, and their new baby were moving in. Derek decided he was returning home, so everything changed. They planned to utilize my room as the nursery for the baby, hence I had to look for another place to live. We had 3 bedrooms, so I questioned why they could just make use of the guest room. My dad shrugged and said they would be staying in the guest room, but Derek's child required a good nursery, hence, evidently, I would be kicked out. I was surprised. He had no concern about my still-in-school status or lack of somewhere to go. He either would call the cops on me or give me 2 weeks to pack and head off. I knew nothing about what to do. I worried, felt deceived, and became enraged. Although it was my only choice, my grandparents, who lived far from my university, moved in with my mom's parents. I didn't want to be around when Derek moved in. Seeing him waltzing back into my life and controlling everything as he always has disgusted me. When I went, my dad hardly bid farewell. Furious, my grandparents arrived to fetch me up. Although I warned them it wouldn't be worth it, they wanted to confront my dad. For 6 months, I have been living with my grandparents, completing my last year of high school and preparing for college. I just wanted to get away from there. I was okay with it as I had no communication with my dad or Derek. I never planned to ever talk to them again. Of course, though, life has a way of bringing you back into circumstances you thought you would avoid. A few days ago, my dad and Derek showed up to my grandparents' house without warning. Being the decent people they are, my grandparents welcomed them in even though they knew what my dad had done to me. Since, to be honest, I was fascinated, I agreed to meet with them. It didn't take long for them to get to the point. I wanted to know why they were here after all these years. Derek and his family returned apparently after losing his job before settling back in with my dad. Though Derek had been looking for employment, they assumed it would be temporary. By use of certain contacts, my dad was able to land him employment at the firm he worked for. Though it wasn't as lucrative as Derek's past employment, it was nevertheless something. Still, things were tight for them. Then the bomb went off. Derek had been pilfering corporate money. He had been skimming the top for months, and now it had at last surfaced. The corporation was threatening to sue Derek and my dad, who they thought were engaged in embezzlement, both personally. They believed that if I informed the CEO that they were only attempting to assist me, it would lessen the damage, give them some time, or maybe get them straight out of the situation totally. I couldn't believe the arrogance. My dad stated it was my duty as their family's servant. Now they expected me to cover for them after everything they had put me through, to lie and spare them from bearing the results of their deeds? I told them no, right away and without thinking twice. The same individuals who had made my life a daily misery now demanded I put my integrity on the line for them. I could not do it, not only for their treatment of me, but also because it was wrong. I knew the chief executive officer. He had been a close friend of my mother's, so I wouldn't utilize her memories to control him. To what my mom stood for, it seemed like a smack in the face. When I turned down, my dad lost it. She would never have wanted me to lie in order to shield those who had been so nasty to me. Starting to shout, he said I was carrying a grudge and that I couldn't allow the past to spoil their lives. Derek was also begging me, claiming they may both go to jail should I fail to assist. Telling me that I owed it to their family to assist them, they tried to guilt me. But I held my position. While Derek had bullied me for as long as I could remember, my dad had booted me out of the house not quite a year earlier. I was not scheduled to cover for them. My dad even started weeping at one point, which startled me as I had never seen him cry before. They had made decisions. Now they had to deal with the results. He stated he was banking on me since, at the end of the day, I remained his son. Although he said he would have assisted me should the positions be reversed, I knew this was untrue. My dad wouldn't have raised a finger for me if I had been the one in danger. They went after understanding I wouldn't move. Ever since, though, I have been thinking nonstop. Part of me feels bad, as it is difficult to understand the concept of them going to jail. Still, I know I made the correct call at the same time. They were asking me to do was wholly unethical, immoral, and unlawful. No matter how hard they try to guilt me, I cannot be a part of it. I have no idea what will happen next, but one thing is certain. I am done with them permanently. After my dad and Derek left my grandparents' house, I felt exhausted. They had built their bed, now they had to sleep in it. The weight of the whole matter rested firmly on me. It was the knowledge that they truly thought I owed them. Not only that they came to me for assistance after throwing me out, the boldness of everything kept playing back in my head. Though they hadn't even tried to make things right and hadn't apologized for treating me like trash, they still believed I would intervene and save them. Not this time. I began to experience a range of feelings throughout the following several days. On one hand, I felt I had done the right thing. Their scheme was dishonest and absurd, and I was not willing to let myself get into a legal quagmire simply because they were too self-serving to own their mistakes. There was, however, guilt as well. No matter how dysfunctional your family is, it's difficult to get away from the notion that you are deserting it. Though I kept thinking about what my dad said, about how I was his son and how he wanted me to help him because of that. Being someone's son does not mean you have to mindlessly support them, particularly given how terribly they have treated you. Though I knew deep inside, I still found it difficult to let go of the guilt. A few days following their visit, my dad texted me. I was not surprised. Knowing they wouldn't give up that readily, sure enough, he was attempting once again. Unlike his past visits, this one he was neither demanding nor hostile. His message came out as more frantic. He stated they were running out of time, the business was approaching pursuing charges, and that both he and Derek may wind up in jail if I fail to assist them. I didn't answer. He portrayed two men who had just committed a mistake, and now needed the support of their family. He was the victim. I knew if I participated, he would try to influence me into having other opinions. I had decided, and I was not going to let their guilt trips control me. After that message, I banned his number as I knew that, absent action, things would only become worse. This was clearly where it was headed. They would keep trying, keep pleading, and then the threats and guilt would come. My grandparents approved of my choice. Blocking him was the only way to prevent things from becoming further out of hand. They had seen personally how my dad and Derek had treated me over all these years, and they understood their nature. They agreed that avoiding the newest material was the wisest course of action when I told them about it. It was at that time that my grandpa decided to get in touch with the CEO of the firm where Derek and my dad worked. They reminded me that this was a scenario my dad and Derek had made for themselves, and they had to deal with the fallout on their own. Being a longtime friend of Mom's, the CEO had always treated our family well, even after her death. When my grandpa spoke with him, the CEO confirmed everything I already knew. Derek had been pilfering from the company for months, and my dad was caught up in it since he had vouchsafed for Derek when he hired. My grandpa wanted to know what was really going on, and if there was any hope of resolving the situation without things spiraling out of control. Time was running short, but the CEO claimed he was ready to let them pay back the money they had pilfers, rather than immediately imposing penalties. The CEO informed my grandfather that the only reason they hadn't previously been sued was because of his respect for my mom. Should they not provide the money soon, the firm was ready to sue both of them. Her presence was allowing him to give them an opportunity, but his tolerance was fraying. Hearing all of this made me even more sure that I had made the correct decision, as he was not going to wait forever, and he most definitely would not let them off the hook without penalties. Derek and my dad had an opportunity to escape jail, pay back what they owed, and do the right thing. Rather than concentrating on that, though, they were dragging me into their mess. Instead of bearing the results of their actions, they asked me to lie and cover for them. A few days after my grandfather's chat with the CEO, my dad tried to call me once more, this time from a new number. Typical of them, really, always searching for the easy way out, even if it meant dragging someone else down with them. I hung up after answering without realizing it was him, the second I heard his voice. Not before he was able to convey a message, though, begging me to give some thought. I banned that phone, too. He said they were desperate, had the means to pay back what they owed, and lacked choices without my support. I wasn't going to bend. They had already burned every bridge with me, and now they were trying to control me into helping them to avoid the results of their deeds. Giving in would just serve to confirm that, given someone to cover for them, they could always get away with whatever they wanted. Though my dad and Derek kept attempting to get in touch, I held solid in my choice. I wasn't that person. Though I knew it was the correct thing to do, my grandparents were happy of me for following my values. It did not mean it was easy. The guilt persisted, and I kept thinking whether cutting them off entirely was the proper thing to do. It wasn't until my grandfather spoke with the CEO once again that I felt some release. The CEO clarified that he was not rushing to file charges either, even if he was not going to let Derek and my dad off the hook. He remarked something that stayed with me and made it plain that there would be no more opportunities after that. He was giving them time to find out how to pay back the money. My mother had told him before she died, he added, that I could always come to him should I ever need assistance, job or internship included. Though it was a little gesture, hearing that reminded me that my mother had always looked out for me, even if it seemed like nobody else did. Knowing that the CEO was still giving them an opportunity to make things right helped to lessen some of my guilt. They had no choices. They still have time to straighten this mess on their own, but I was not going to be pulled into it. Should they wind up in jail, it would be the result of their own behavior, not mine. Over the course of the days, I grew more sure of my choice. I had my own life to concentrate on right now. College was just around the horizon, and I had worked hard to get this position. I wasn't going to allow Derek and my dad to drag me back into their poisonous environment. I had severed links with them for good, and now they had to deal with the results. Although it was a difficult decision, it was one that would help me personally. I was not their scapegoat anymore, and I would not let their issues follow me. After I blocked my dad's second try to get in touch, things were quiet for a little. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. My grandparents and I continued on as normal, but in the rear of my mind, I knew this was not done yet. Since that last message, I hadn't heard from Derek or my dad. Nevertheless, I knew their position was growing worse daily. One evening, my grandfather entered the living room looking gravely. He had recently ended his call with the CEO of the firm Derek and my dad worked for. My grandpa shook his head and stated, "They haven't paid back a single dime yet," bracing me with terrible news, but not precisely what I expected. "The CEO is losing his patience. He will press charges if they do not come up with the money shortly." I was not shocked. I had known this was on the horizon. Running out of choices, my dad and Derek had placed themselves in an impossibility. Still, hearing it loud gave everything more reality. "He wanted to let you know, Dad and half-brother, that he's still willing to let them a little more time, but not much," my grandfather said. "But they had no one to blame but themselves. And he wanted to see you to make sure you were all right. That last bit really got me going. His door is always open if you ever need anything. This man was supporting me only because he had loved my mother so much, not because he should have." It was both sad and hopeful. It occurred to me how different things would have been if my mother had still been here. She would never have permitted things to get this terrible. She would have figured out a way to keep our family intact, even if it meant positioning herself in the center of everything. She was gone, though, and now I had to sort things out on my own. I thanked my grandfather for informing me and tried to get the idea of my dad and Derek out of my head. I wanted no more time wasted fretting about them. After making their bed, they had to lie on it immediately. I had decided beforehand I would not be supporting them. I was also going to keep to it, but it wasn't that simple as much as I attempted to push forward. The guilt stayed at the rear of my consciousness. I kept seeing them in jail, and that made me uncomfortable. Though I understood that intervening to aid would be a mistake, part of me still felt like I ought to. About a week following my grandfather's CEO contact, my dad contacted me once more, this time by letter, assuming I would let them control me once more. One afternoon, I discovered it in the mailbox. For a brief period, I considered tossing it away without even opening it, but curiosity won me over. Hence, I chose to read the long letter full of emotional manipulation and frantic appeals about how much danger they were in, how Derek's future was at risk, and how they both needed me to help them escape jail. My dad spoke on and on. It was typical deception. He even attempted to shame me by claiming that if I didn't intervene, Derek's child, my niece, would grow up without a father. Not holding back, my dad was pressing exactly the buttons he knew. Still, something clicked as I went over the letter. The small child who always sought his dad's praise was not particularly afraid anymore. Not the lad who let Derek harass him without objecting. After reading the letter, I laid it down on the table and turned away. I had grown up, and I was not going to allow their poisonous conduct to rule me anymore. I was not compelled to reply. Nothing more had to be said. A few days later, my grandparents and I sat down to discuss the whole matter. I had made my decision, and nothing of guilt or coercion could undo that. "I know it's tough," my grandma replied softly, "but you've done the right thing." They had been really helpful during this whole affair. "I know, but you're not in charge of their decisions or have to tidy their mess." My grandfather said, "They abandoned you first, son. It's just hard to shake the feeling that I'm abandoning them. He kicked you out and treated you like you didn't count. You owe them nothing," he said naturally. Dad had booted me out without thinking twice to provide space for Derek and his family, and now, following all, they had the arrogance to come crawling back and seek my assistance. When I truly gave it some thinking, it was preposterous. As the days passed, I grew more sure of my choice. I concentrated on getting ready for college, hanging out with friends, and reconstructing my life free from the ongoing weight of my family's turmoil. Finally, around 2 weeks later, my grandfather received another call from the CEO. It was freeing, in a sense, to at last detach myself from all the negativity I'd grown up with. Both Derek and my dad had formally run out of time. The CEO was poised to proceed with legal action since they had not returned the money. Not now was turning back possible. My grandpa told me over dinner one night that they were going to be charged with embezzlement. Unless they discovered some miracle means to come up with the money, they would suffer penalties. Neither was I, nor was he shocked. My grandfather shook his head and said, "They had their opportunity. It had been coming for a while, and now it was finally occurring. They missed all of this even though they could have paid it back." I nodded, but I said nothing else. This is on them. My dad and Derek were arrested at last. There was nothing further to say. The story dominated local headlines. Father and son accused of pilfering thousands from the family company. Seeing our last name everywhere embarrassed me, but I knew it was not something I could control. I had nothing to do with it. After they were formally accused, I severed any remaining relationship with them. That type of poison has no place in my life anymore. My grandparents helped me block any fresh attempts my dad and Derek made to reach out, and they completely backed my decision. We were done. As the summer drew to a conclusion, I turned my attention to the next. Along with fresh experiences and the opportunity to create a life free from Derek's bullying or daily abuse underlined by my dad, I had college to look forward to. At last free to live for myself, I knew in the back of my mind that my choice to cut them off was not motivated by one circumstance. It covered all that had preceded it. Years of being disregarded, minimized, and treated as if I had no importance. Years of trying to get my dad's approval just to find it never going to happen. This was about recovering my life and choosing that I was worth more than the way they had treated me. It was about more than just money or falsehoods. I have no idea what will happen to my dad and Derek going forward. Perhaps they will work something out, or perhaps they will wind up in jail. I have moved on. However, one thing is certain. I will not be in their life going forward. I am done allowing their faults to dictate my life. After the dust cleared on my dad and Derek's arrest, it seemed like an unusual peace swept over my life. And for the first time, I feel like I am in charge of my own future. I had been knotted in their drama, either directly or indirectly, for so long. Now, with both of them dealing with the results of their deeds, it seemed as though a chapter of my life had ended. Gone was the weight that had constantly pushed on me, the sense that I was inadequate for them. I had no cause to turn around first. It wasn't only about their being detained. It was about ending a cycle of emotional abuse, guilt, and manipulation that had dominated much of my life. I came to see that severing them had let me advance in a way I never would have predicted. With that independence, I put myself into getting ready for college. My future was no longer connected to what they thought of or how they treated me. It marked a fresh beginning and couldn't have happened at a better moment. My grandparents were pleased with how I managed things. Their encouragement changed everything. They reminded me that I was spared bearing the weight of my dad's and Derek's errors. Since I had made the proper decision, for myself, I could go ahead without guilt. Over the course of the weeks before I moved to college, I began to consider all that had transpired. Growing up, I had always felt like I was living in Derek's shadow. It was not only the recent events with Derek's crime and my dad's frantic appeals that I thought about. It was the years of abuse, continual favoritism, and way I had always been pushed aside in favor of Derek. No matter how much of a jerk he was to me, he was the golden child, the one who never sinned and always received my dad's approval. Years of attempting to win my dad's love and prove I was valuable never paid off. Looking back, I can see how fruitless their endeavors were. For the longest time, I believed something was wrong with me. My dad had made his decision long ago. No amount of high grades or effort on my side was ever going to change that. I considered perhaps if I improved, if I worked more, if I could somehow start to resemble Derek, my dad would then notice me. But today I see that it was they rather than me missing. Both my dad and Derek had issues. Instead of working through them, they turned them out on me. It never about me not being sufficient. It was a terrible thing to swallow, but it also provided me closure since they didn't know how to love or support me in the manner I deserved. I did not cause the issue. Never had I ever been. Moving to college seemed like entering a new world, one in which I was free to be myself without the weight of my history dragging me down. I was just caught in the crossfire of their toxic relationship and suffered the price for far too long. More motivated than ever to maximize this chance, I was also terrified and delighted. I got the opportunity to identify myself for the first time, free from Derek's bullying hovering over me or Dad's continual critique. My first few weeks of college were a whirl. I could simply be me. I immersed myself in my academics, made friends, and met new individuals. I enjoyed the sense of freedom I experienced, no more worrying what mood my dad might be in when I returned home, nor walking on eggshells. Of course, there were times when my history would rear itself. I had my own place, my own life, and it was all I had thought it would be. There were evenings when I would lie awake, wondering how things could have turned out had my mother survived. Could she have shielded me from all of this? Would she have bridged the distance separating my dad and me? I learned to be good with it. I never know the answers to such questions. What transpired occurred, and I am unable to undo it. All I can do is forward. About my dad and Derek, I have not heard from them since their detention. I suppose they are still coping with the consequences of their behavior, but I have put peace with the knowledge that it is no longer of relevance to me. Either they will sort things out, or they won't. It is not my job to clean their messes anymore. I have sufficient done. I've supplied enough. It's now time for me to concentrate on my own life. One lesson about self-worth has stayed with me all through this. I gauged my worth for so long based on how my dad treated me. His lack of compassion and attention helped me to identify my own self. I've come to see, though, that establishing boundaries and removing poisonous individuals out of your life is an act of self-love rather than only self-preservation. That is, not someone who never really saw me for who I am. It's realizing you are deserving of respect, compassion, and encouragement, and better than this. Though my dad and Derek never gave me that, I have discovered it in the people around me who really care. My bond with my grandparents has been even closer since everything has transpired. Through all of this, they have been my rock. I am daily thankful for their love and encouragement. They have taught me what family should be, unconditional, loving, and always there when you need them. Looking ahead, I'm hopeful. They have helped me realize that I'm not alone, even if it seems like the rest of my family has dropped me. Though I'm not sure exactly what lies ahead of me, I know that right now I am in charge of my own road. I'm not living in someone else's shadow anymore, attempting to satisfy unrealistic demands or seek acceptance from those who will never provide it. Living for myself seems very fantastic. Still, there is a part of me that worries about what may happen should my dad or Derek try to get back in touch. Though honestly, I'm not sure I would be receptive to it. Maybe one day they would want to try to atone or offer apologies. I have a life without them, and I am not willing to go back over past hurts. For now, I am focused on the present, on college, my friends, and creating a future full of possibilities. I am not clinging to anger or resentment anymore, but I also know that bringing them back into my life would just bring back the misery and poison that I have fought so hard to leave behind. My history or the individuals who sought to knock me down no longer define me now. My own power, decisions, and aspirations define me, and for the first time in my life, I can declare with assurance that I'm happy. Really, quite content. Nobody can take from me what I have. Story 2. I took care of myself since my dad wouldn't feed me. His new wife wants me to wait on her children now. I was around 12 when I first started cooking my own lunch. My mother had cancer and she was quite sick. It was also apparent that she was unable to do all the little tasks, such as lunch packing. At the time, it wasn't a huge problem. I had enough experience to put together a sandwich and some munchies. I thus just started handling it myself. It seemed the right thing to do after she was gone. It was just the way things were. During the day, my dad wasn't actually around much, and he never packed my lunches. To be honest, half the time I doubt he even knew what I was eating. You, quote, old enough to handle it, he simply remarked. And that was that. I so continued to bring my own lunch and didn't give it much attention. It turned into a ritual for me. Take a few items out of the refrigerator, place them in a bag, and head out. Not a huge thing, is it? Let us go back a few years. Even at 16, I still prepare my own meals, continuing to look after myself. But that was then. This is today. You see, my dad remarried to a woman named Sarah a few years ago. She had 3 children from a prior marriage. There are 2 boys, ages 6 and 11, and a girl. I wasn't too concerned about them moving in at first. Having additional people in the house was strange at first, but whatever. Not like they were my issue or anything. I was in my own place, in my own room, doing my own thing. However, Sarah began to feel that because I was already preparing lunch for myself, I ought to be doing the same for her children around a year ago. She said that it would simplify and help so she wouldn't have to. When she asked me the first time, I recall thinking she was kidding. Really, folks? I mean, why would I prepare them lunch? These kids and I are not even that close. Furthermore, I'm not accountable for them. She wasn't kidding, though. She genuinely thought I would do it. I declined her request. Completely. It didn't bother me in the least. My dad can't be bothered, so I'm already preparing my own lunch. Why, therefore, would I fill my day with extra work? I don't have time to go around making lunches for a bunch of kids since I have to balance school with a part-time job. It didn't seem like a huge issue to me. After all, aren't they her children? I'm not supposed to look after them. Sarah seemed to have a different perspective. She was surprised when I declined. She gave me the impression that I had just offended her. She began ranting about how absurd it was that I wouldn't want to support my siblings, as she referred to them, in need of assistance. However, in all honesty, I don't view them that way. These youngsters are certainly not my siblings, and I hardly know them. Even after that first disagreement, we're not even close. That seemed like the end of it to me. I assumed she would move on and understand that I'm not here to look after her children. But no. She went immediately to my dad, presumably believing that he would support her. My dad, who naturally dislikes disagreement, only sort of agreed with her. He made some comment about how it wouldn't hurt to lend a hand a bit. As you can see, you've joined the family. I could sense my temper rising. I now belong to the family. How long ago is that? No one inquired about my feelings of having 3 strangers residing in my home. However, all right, whatever. I declined anyway. That wasn't going to change. I was indifferent to Sarah's evident anger. I understood that if I gave in even once, I would have to make lunches forever. After that, things became uncomfortable. Sarah used to give me this look like she was secretly criticizing me for not assisting when she spotted me preparing my lunch. Not because I'm a heartless person or anything. Of course, I would assist if it were an emergency or anything. However, this. This was only her attempt to avoid fulfilling her role as a mother. It was not acceptable to me. She then began to indulge in guilt trips. She would say things like, "You must be so selfish not to want to help your family," or "It must be nice to have to worry about yourself only." She even began trying to reach out to me by using her children. The twins approached me one morning and said, "Why don't you make our lunch?" "You're good at it," Mom remarked. I was furious about that. Like, how are you going to make me feel awful by dragging your kids along with you? But I was not buying into it. "Just ask your mother," I said. "Not me, but she is the one in command." That was not warmly received. After that, Sarah became even more passive-aggressive. She would deliberately create a large mess and leave it for me to clean up if I was in the kitchen preparing lunch. She might also leave the refrigerator open to hasten the expiration of food. It was absurd. I chose to ignore it and carried on with my work. The worst part, though, was when she increasingly tried to use her children as pawns against me. She used to say things like, "I'm so busy. Please monitor the twins for a little while, or I have errands to run. Are you able to assist them with homework?" It's like, no, I'm not that person. I'm not a pre-installed nanny. I have to take care of my personal matters, job and school. Why should I commit to many days? She raised the ante significantly. She came into the kitchen and asked me directly while I was in the middle of preparing my lunch, "Would you mind helping with the kids' meals instead?" It's not really that significant. I reiterated to her that I don't have time and that it's not my job. "It's only lunch," she continued, her expression disgruntled. "Already you're taking care of yourself. For what reason not for them?" I lost my temper a little. I responded, "Because they're your kids, not mine," at that moment. "I'm not their father, I am not their mother, and I am not here to compensate for your lack of actions." Her expression told me she wasn't expecting it. For a minute, she remained still and silent. She simply turned around and left after that. I was sorely mistaken in my assumption that it was the end of it. I reasoned that Sarah may back off for a spell following their most recent disagreement. However, I was completely mistaken. Nothing at all calmed down. If anything, her persistence increased, as if she were determined to force me to give in. Naturally, she went directly back to my dad. But this time it was more than simply a passing thought. She attacked him with all her might, telling me that I should start contributing to the family's needs and helping out more around the house. While I was in my room, I could hear them fighting in the living room. My dad, as usual, was just kind of agreeing with Sarah in that passive manner he usually does when he doesn't want to deal with the matter. Sarah was the one speaking the most during the conversation. My dad hadn't even knocked on my door when I realized what was about to happen. He entered, took a seat on the side of my bed, and sighed as if he were going to deliver some important news, which is never very important, just infuriating. He began to massage his hands together, as you can see. You know, Sarah's got a point. You could lend a hand more here, it wouldn't harm. With what can you use help? Not wanting to make things easy for him, I inquired, knowing exactly where this was headed. Though he was too deep in already, his hesitation gave me the impression that he didn't really want to have this talk either. He mentioned that the children were assisting Sarah while she was busy and were preparing their meals. I take it you're already preparing your own lunch? I merely gave him a long, blank gaze. Yes, I made my own lunch. For me? Not for anybody else. He responded, I know, as if he was attempting to diffuse the situation before it became hot. But now you're a member of this family. Furthermore, Sarah has a lot on her plate. It wouldn't hurt to take a slight leadership role. Dad, here is where I ran out of patience. Already I'm taking charge. I prepare my own meals. I have a part-time job. I look after my own belongings. Why am I obligated to accept more? They aren't my children. Sarah chose to wed you over me. It irritated him. His entire demeanor shifted, transitioning from attempting to appear composed and tactful to being agitated. This is not about doing the bare minimum. This is about becoming a member of the family. Not that we're asking you to be the child's caregiver. Just lend a hand. Families act in this way. By now, I knew that things would blow up if I didn't monitor it, and I was becoming very irritated. I couldn't, however, just ignore it. These are your children, not mine, with Sarah. I advised you to get a babysitter or whatever if you needed assistance with them. I'm not here to step in and take over for you two since I have my own life to live. He remained silent for a moment, only sat there, seemingly taking in what I had spoken. Then he stood up, shot me that look of disappointment from a father, and left the room. I knew it wouldn't end like this. Whatever I said was not going to cheer up Sarah, who was undoubtedly waiting downstairs for the results. After that, things became pretty uncomfortable. It seemed as though Sarah was always in the kitchen, observing and hanging over me. She made no attempt to mask her annoyance. She would to whisper to herself tiny remarks like, "Must be nice to only worry about yourself." Or perhaps some folks have no idea what a family is. I choose to disregard it. I refuse to participate in her passive-aggressive bullshit. I knew that if I did it, it would only lead to more arguments, and I was too tired for that. She then performed the guilt trip maneuver. She enters the room carrying the twins as I'm preparing my lunch for the next day in the kitchen. "Oh, lads," she says, "don't you wish you had a big brother who would have taken the time to cook you lunch?" I stared directly at her after stopping what I was doing. It was not acceptable to me. "That's unfair, and you know it," I replied. "I cannot be held accountable for them by you." It irritated her. "Why don't you two go play?" she said, turning to face the lads. "I need to talk to your brother like a grown-up." She turned on me as soon as they departed. "It's not all about the meals, you know. The issue is that you're not even interested in lending a hand. It is self-serving." I was offended by the word selfish. Self-centered? I prepare my own meals and use my own funds to pay for them. I quote, am not requesting care from anyone. You are the one who is being selfish by trying to shift your obligations onto me. She didn't anticipate my strong resistance. She first appeared a little stunned, but she soon got over it. My job is a full-time job. I'm attempting to keep this house running well while parenting 3 children. It would be the least you could do to join the family. I gave a head shake. I'm a member of the family, Sarah. That does not, however, obligate me to take up your position. You chose to have these children with your father. It's your and Dad's responsibility to look after them. By looking after myself, I'm doing more than enough. She looked at me angrily and left the room. Not sure how she was going to respond to it. Naturally, that wasn't the end of the day as planned, despite my first assumption. I heard Sarah chatting to my dad again later that evening. She put on a strong show, complaining about how I was only thinking about myself and not caring about the family, and how this was making her life so much more difficult. My dad knocked on my door again the following day, as I knew he would come to me about it. Pay attention. He got going. I understand. We all live under the same roof, but you don't think it's your duty to look after the kids. Additionally, it would be great if you could occasionally lend a hand. It's not a very big request. I was just sick of the whole thing by this point. It's a big ask, Dad. I perform more than enough work here already. Sarah should talk to you, not to me if she needs help. I will not take on the role of a substitute parent. He did not press the matter further, but he appeared frustrated. It's possible that he didn't want to deal with another argument because he knew I wouldn't back down. Things were tense from then on. I had the impression that Sarah was watching me every time I entered the kitchen, waiting for me to make a mistake or give in to her demands. I was not going to, though. It wasn't my job to figure this out. And the more I resisted, the more they tried to make me do it. I reasoned that things couldn't get much worse after our most recent conversation with my dad. Sarah was furious. I was just trying to keep my head down and keep out of the drama while my dad was getting frustrated. Of course, they were unable to ignore it. Another turn of events occurred, and this time it had nothing to do with lunch. It had to do with dinner. It all began one evening while I was preparing dinner for myself in the kitchen. By now, I'd gotten used to cooking my own meals because I didn't really want to sit down with Sarah and my dad. Things were just too tense. And honestly, I'd rather avoid that awkward family dinner. Plus, I'd been paying for my own food with the money I made from my part-time job. I didn't want to hear any complaints about how I wasn't contributing to the household or whatever. I was making something simple, some chicken and rice with veggies. Nothing fancy, but it was enough for me. I was halfway through cooking when Sarah walked in with the kids. They were hungry and I guess expecting dinner to be ready, but obviously I hadn't made anything for them. Sarah looked at what I was cooking and then turned to me, all annoyed. "Are you not making dinner for everyone?" she asked, like I was supposed to. Just know that's what she wanted. I looked at her and said, "No, this is for me. You didn't ask me to make anything for everyone." She stared at me for a second, clearly not happy with that answer. "You're cooking for yourself, but you couldn't think to make enough for the kids, too, Dot." She lost her temper. "They're hungry." I could feel myself getting frustrated already, but I tried to stay calm. "I'm not their parent, Sarah. I'm just making dinner for me. You can make something for them, or Dad can." It's not my responsibility that set her off. She started going off about how selfish I was, how I never thought about anyone else, and how I was splitting the family by refusing to help Dot. It was the same speech I'd heard before, but this time it was more intense because now she had the kids standing there looking at me like I'd done something wrong. I just stood there letting her rant because honestly, what was I supposed to say? I wasn't going to start making dinner for everyone just because she was mad at me. I knew if I gave in, it would never end. When she finally stopped, I just said, "Look, if you want me to cook for everyone, you need to ask me ahead of time. I'm not going to just start making meals for the whole family because you expect it." She didn't like that answer either. "I shouldn't have to ask you, Dot." She lost her temper. "You live here? You should want to help." I was done at that point. I turned back to my food, finished cooking, and sat down to eat at the kitchen table. Sarah stormed out of the kitchen with the kids, muttering under her breath about how I was impossible and how she couldn't believe I didn't care about them. I chose to disregard it. I was tired of the whole situation, and I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into doing something I didn't want to do. But of course, things didn't stop there. The next day, Sarah and my dad had another talk with me. This time, they both sat me down in the living room like it was some kind of intervention. I already knew what was coming. "We need to talk about the way you've been acting lately." My dad started looking all serious. I leaned back on the couch and crossed my arms. "What about it?" Sarah jumped in right away. "You're refusing to help out with anything around the house? You won't make lunch for the kids. You won't make dinner, Dot. And now you're even purchasing your own groceries and preparing your own meals. Like you're not part of the family. That's because I'm not their parent," I fired back. "I'm not responsible for making sure they eat. That's your job, not mine." My dad groaned, plainly growing upset. "We're not claiming you're their parent, but we are a family. We all live here and it wouldn't hurt you to chip in once in a while." "I do pitch in. I remarked, increasing my voice a little. I look after my own belongings. I produce my own meals and I pay for it with my own money. I'm not asking you guys for anything. So why do I have to take on more? Sarah, interrupt once again, since you are a member of this family, who asks for what is not important, it quote s, about making a contribution and integrating into the family. I could not help but squint. By not depending on any of you folks, I am making a contribution. You'd also be whiny if I wasn't cooking for myself. Then what's the problem? Apparently, they wanted me to assist with the kids more, which was the problem. The fact that I was already preparing my own food wasn't sufficient. They desired that I also make theirs. They wanted me to take on more duties, but only those that they were not in the mood to perform themselves. I told them I wasn't their cook and I wasn't their babysitter. You believe I should start preparing their meals, but I've already informed you that I won't. By now, it was obvious that my dad was becoming impatient. They are a member of this family, but we're not asking you to be their babysitter. You're doing great, too. Why is it so difficult for you to see that assisting them isn't really that big of a deal? I gave a headshake. As it is quite significant. If you are incapable of handling your obligations, I will not take them on. It quote s your fault, not mine. After then, the discourse truly stalled. Sarah and my dad persisted in attempting to scare me into lending a hand more, but I refused to give in. I was going to take care of my own business and not allow them to pile more on top of it. I was aware that it would never end if I caved in even little. They would continue to heap on the misery until I was essentially taking care of them all. I so refused to back down. I continued to purchase my own groceries, make my own dinners, and follow my own path. And naturally, they continued to ignore me. My dad often looked displeased when he saw me, and Sarah stopped talking to me unless she had to. That wasn't going to make me change my mind, though. After that, there was a lot of tension in the house. I felt like they were watching me every time I walked into the kitchen to cook anything, waiting for me to make a mistake or give in, but I never did. I didn't let them shame me into doing anything more. I just maintained taking care of myself. Although living that way wasn't pleasant, I knew it was preferable than having them treat me badly. Even if things were a little awkward, at least this way I was in charge of my own life. I assumed that ultimately they would either get past it or find a different approach to handling the circumstance. However, despite their best efforts to coerce me, I was never going to be their personal cook or babysitter. You would think that after all the arguments and stress, things would settle down, wouldn't they? Naturally, though, no. As a matter of fact, things managed to grow worse. I was trying my hardest to keep my head down, keep myself out of the way, and just take care of myself. Really, I didn't see why it was so difficult for them to comprehend. Why couldn't I just be let be by Sarah and my dad when I wasn't asking for anything? Regardless, everything culminated one day when Sarah made the decision to escalate the situation. After school, I'm in my room finishing some schoolwork when I hear my dad and Sarah downstairs chatting. Though I was having trouble understanding the words, I knew it was about me. There, quote, a taut vibe behind conversations when people's voices are hovering just below the quiet side. Yes, that is how it was. At first, I didn't give it much thought since, to be honest, I'd become accustomed to their criticism of me. However, Sarah walks upstairs and knocks on my door approximately 20 minutes later. I had a feeling things wouldn't work out well. "We need to talk," she says as she enters without even asking whether everything is well. Once more, here we go, I pondered. I reclined in my chair and tried not to lose my composure. Regarding what? She takes a seat on my bed's edge and looks at me gravely. It is with the children. She gets going. I have to stop handling things on my own. Your dad concurs that I need assistance. I silently rolled my eyes. Despite the several times we've had this chat, it seems she still hasn't understood. Sarah, as I've said previously, I'm not in charge of the children. Dad and you both are. She found that to be rather upsetting. Despite appearing on the verge of losing it, she managed to keep her composure. Hardly. We all live here together, and I know they're not your children. Furthermore, we ought to be supporting one another as a family. It was unavoidable for me. I had to confront her. Yes, but when you're just trying to throw everything at me, it doesn't really seem like we're supporting one another. My purpose is not to simplify your life. At that point, she started her emotional guilt trip all over again. Since you're not willing to assist, do you really want the kids to go without lunch or dinner? Right now, what type of example are you giving them? I had to draw the line at this point. Sarah, when it comes to tasks that are genuinely my duty, I'm not refusing to assist. But meals for your children, you are responsible for that. You are their mother. It wasn't my intention to look after them. For a little while, her silence made me believe that she had finally understood. No, she struck me with. Maybe you should just start taking care of yourself completely if you don't want to be a part of this family. I looked at her, perplexed. What does that imply exactly? With her arms crossed, she gave me a look as though she was giving me a serious ultimatum. You won't be able to consume the food we buy for this house if you don't assist out with the kids. Either you belong in the family or you don't. I simply looked at her for a while, attempting to take in what she had just said. She was really threatening to withhold everything they purchased from me if I didn't start preparing food for her children. This was absurd. I turned to look at her. All right, I said, refusing to back down. Still, I've been covering my own food costs. I'll continue to do that. However, don't expect me to watch your kids because that's what you feel like doing. I think she was too angry to care that I wasn't giving in, even though she appeared a little surprised. If that's your preference. All right. As she turned to walk toward the door, she said, Don't, however, come to us in tears when times are tough. Rolling my eyes, I watched her go. Remain calm? I refused to. I therefore essentially began living in my own home as a roommate after that. I would prepare my own meals, buy my own groceries, and generally avoid them. It was strange, though, because whenever I went into the kitchen to prepare something, my dad or Sarah would be there staring at me. You know, the expression that suggests they're waiting for you to make a mistake or own up to your mistakes. I wasn't wrong, though, and I wasn't going to give in to their bullying. Sarah was in the kitchen one evening when I got home from work, but something wasn't right. The kitchen was a total wreck. Dishes were all over the place and unclean. It appeared as though no one had cleaned up after supper because the counters were in disarray. Usually I would simply enter, carry out my business, and leave. However, I sensed the tension increasing this time. Ignoring the mess, I started quietly preparing my dinner. Sarah leaned against the counter as she entered. If you could assist with cleanup, that would be great. Without even glancing at me, she spoke. I didn't even look back. The mess wasn't made by me. Why do I need to tidy things up? She let out a deep sigh as if I were being unreasonable. For that is the nature of family members. They support one another. Turning to face her, I put down my spoon. No. Within a family, individuals accept accountability for their own misdeeds. I'm not cleaning up this mess since I didn't make it. She gave me a really angry glance, but said nothing. I just went back to cooking once she left the kitchen. Now, it seemed like every conversation with her was a struggle, but I refused to give in. I refused to let her shame me into contributing more than I should have. After I finished eating, I tidied up my personal belongings and walked back to my room. Even though I knew things could only get worse from here, I chose to ignore it. If they didn't like what I was doing, that was their issue. I was just doing what I had to do to survive in this place. More awkward silences, chilly looks, and passive-aggressive remarks marked the next several days, but to be honest, I had become used to it by now. I just continued to do my own thing, kept my head down, and tried to avoid getting in their way. I was aware that while I couldn't alter their opinion of me, I could manage how I responded to it, and I was doing okay as far as I was concerned. As Monday arrived, tensions were already high. However, I wasn't prepared for what followed. I had spent a few hours by myself at home. For a change, I made a decent meal because I had the home to myself. Something worthy, not just the fast food I always throw together. I was in the kitchen preparing some homemade spaghetti sauce and perhaps some garlic bread to go with it. Though it was nothing special, I felt pleased with it. I had just finished my meal when Sarah and her children arrived home. The sound of bags falling to the ground and the typical pandemonium could be heard as they entered. However, everything became quite quiet. At first, I didn't give it much thought. Continued to eat. Subsequently, Sarah entered the kitchen, and her expression conveyed to me that something significant was going to happen. With a visibly unhappy expression, she looked at the food on the table and then at me. For the children, Did you cook enough? As if she knew the answer before she ever asked. I gave a headshake. Nope, I just finished preparing my own meal. That response was incorrect. With a sharp voice, she yelled, "My kids are starving, and you're simply going to sit there and eat?" I tried not to roll my eyes as I gazed at her. "Sarah, your children are not going hungry. They recently returned home. And no, you never asked me to prepare them supper, therefore no, I didn't quote T. She scowled at me, her annoyance intensifying. "You shouldn't need to ask me this. You know they should eat because you are in this house, but all you can think about is yourself. It is repulsive." I was prepared to protest, so I put down my fork, but I never had the chance. She had already started ranting and accusing me of everything. How self-centered I was, how unaware of anybody but myself. It was made much more unpleasant by the fact that her kids were watching the entire affair from the doorway, wondering why I was refusing to help them. "Sarah, I'm not their parent." I tried to remain cool as I spoke. "I'm not responsible for ensuring their food. That's your father's fault. Dare not assign responsibility to us for this." Her cheeks flushed with rage, she yelled, "Do you also reside here? It's your responsibility to provide to this family. However, no. Would you rather prepare supper for yourself alone as though you were a visitor in this home?" I was especially struck by that last line. Visitor. I'm not a visitor. This is where I have lived all of my life. The ones that moved in were you and your children. Not me. Already I'm looking after myself, purchasing my own shopping and preparing my own meals. I have no custody of your children, that's when she lost it. You prepare your own meals and buy some groceries, and for that you feel like such a grown-up? You have no idea what true accountability is like. Attempt to raise 3 children on your own. After that, you may discuss accountability. I got up because I could take no more of being shouted at while sitting there. "Sarah, that's not my concern. You made the decision to become a parent. I should not be caring for them. You and Dad should. By keeping out of your way and taking care of my own business, I've already done more than enough. I won't take on the role of your live cook and babysitter simply because you're stressed out. That was not her favorite response. She began calling me derogatory names, telling me how useless I was, how I was no longer even a member of the family, and how much she detested having me live with her. To be honest, it was the ugliest quarrel any of us had ever had. Her children remained still, listening to everything that was said. I had no intention of letting her bring me down to her level. With that, I turned and left the kitchen. I was not going to continue battling. I walked to my room, shut the door, and made an effort to relax. She was still shrieking downstairs, but I tried to block it out as much as I could. Things eventually became quiet again, so I assumed she had given up. However, the situation had gotten worse by dawn. Before heading to school, I went downstairs to get my breakfast, and there was Sarah, seated at the kitchen table, giving me the creeps. There was a strange tension in the air, even though the youngsters had already started eating. I simply picked up my belongings and turned to go when Sarah spoke out. "Are you going to prepare dinner for tonight?" Her tone was icy and forceful as she spoke. I paused to give her a glance. No comma, I'm not. "Are you planning to prepare the kids' meal this evening?" Disregarding what I had stated, she repeated, "If you fail to do so, you should never again expect to dine at this house." It sounded so absurd that I nearly burst out laughing. "Sarah, already I purchase my own food. Even so, what are you even discussing?" With her chair scraping the floor, she got to her feet. "I mean it. You are not a member of this family if you refuse to help out. We bought this house. Don't touch any food. Don't count on our assistance. From now on, you're on your own." She was dead serious, as I realized when I glanced at her. She was actually attempting to discipline me for not complying with her wishes. I just gave a headshake. "All right, I will continue to buy my own food. In any case, I don't need anything from you folks." I said nothing more before heading off to school. I couldn't stop thinking about how crazy things had gotten all day. It no longer concerned lunch or dinner. Control was at issue. Sarah asked me to follow her instructions, as well as when I didn't. I wasn't going to let her win, even if she was attempting to make my life as unpleasant as possible. That evening, I prepared my own dinner once more, brought a bag of goods home, and disregarded my dad's and Sarah's disapproving stares. They were clearly waiting for me to give in and apologize, but I had no intention of doing so. I refused to be coerced into taking on their duties because I had my own life and obligations of my own. I didn't need their assistance. I was doing just great, in my opinion. Change. At this time, the tension in the home was intolerable. Things were strange after everything, with Sarah threatening to cut me off from the family and demanding that I cook supper after work or school. I would feel as though I was living with strangers. No one spoke to me unless it was absolutely necessary. Even then, it was always curt, clipped, and full of attitude. All right with me, to be honest. That way there would be less drama. But one Friday night, it all reached a boiling point. As usual, as soon as I came home from work, I went directly to the kitchen to cook myself some food. Upon entering with my goods in hand, I immediately sensed a problem. My dad and Sarah were seated at the kitchen table as I stepped in the door, and they both gave me a quick glance. They seemed to have been waiting for me. I set down my goods and began to open them, only attempting to act typical. However, Sarah got up and said, "We should talk." I didn't even look back. Regarding what? My dad simply sat there looking serious as she crossed her arms. "You're not helping this family in any way," Sarah began, her tone acerbic and angry. "You take up space here by living here, yet you're not contributing in any way. I'm over it too." I looked up at her. "I already told you, I look after myself. I prepare my own meals, shop for my own goods, and move aside. What more are you looking for?" She moved in closer, evidently unhappy with my response. "I want you to come live with us as family. This entails preparing meals for everyone, assisting with the children, and making a real contribution." I was compelled to shake my head. "I have been making a contribution. I am not depending on any of you. In fact, by taking care of myself, I'm simplifying your life." She wouldn't have it, though. "That's insufficient," she yelled. "You are not allowed to live here and perform your basic needs. Since we are a family, we support one another." My patience ran out at that moment. "Sarah, I'm not related to you. I did not request this. Dad and you made the decision to get married and start a family with 3 children. I didn't. By avoiding your path and not creating any issues, I've already done more than enough. However, I refuse to assume your obligations." At last, my dad raised his voice, a little softer but no less harsh. "Whether you like it or not, you are a member of our family, and we want you to behave accordingly." As I observed him, I came to a realization. No matter what I said or how hard I tried to express myself, they would never comprehend it. They would constantly want me to do more than I ought to. It has nothing to do with logic or fairness. It has to do with their desire for power. I took a deep breath. What do you know? I don't want to be a part of the family if this is what it means to be one. You may continue doing your thing, and I'll continue to do mine. However, I refuse to be coerced by you to go above and beyond what is just . My dad only shook his head, and Sarah sent me a frown. "All right," Sarah said in a chilly tone. "However, don't count on us to assist you in any way going forward. You're by yourself." All I did was nod. "I am already." After that, I picked up my groceries, returned to my room, and closed the door. Story 3. Dad moved in with his wife and 2 children after secretly getting married. They believe they now own the property. Living in the large, ancient house my mother left me when she died away when I was just 16, I am a 25-year-old woman. This isn't simply any house. It's an ancestral home that has belongings and memories from several generations of my family. A few months ago, my 52-year-old dad and his friends took this vacation, and when he returned home, he had a surprise. Steph, his 51-year-old high school love, and he were married. They had been communicating covertly for about 2 years. I had no idea what was going on, had no idea he was seeing someone. The next thing I know, Steph and my 2 stepsisters, let's just call them Lizzie and Lexi, have moved in. Not to mention their 2 Kiowas, of course, Hermes and Gucci. Yes, they really go by such names. The twins, who are 20 years old and enrolled in a local public college, thought that by living here rather than on campus or renting someplace else, they might save some money. With 7 bedrooms, more than 8 bathrooms, a basement, and a poolside yard, the house is undoubtedly spacious enough. But since they moved there, problems have kept coming up one after another. The legendary room shuffle comes first. Steph determined she needed additional closet space for her high-end purses and other items. Whose room has the second largest closet, you ask? Yes, my. In fact, she recommended that I downsize to a smaller room. That one gets my foot down. Told her the truth. I quote, V, had this room all my life, and I have no intention of moving out of it when I buy a house. To defuse the situation, my dad offered to divide the space in my closet between Steph's belongings and his possessions in a separate room. Give in, I suppose. The twins are the next in line. Absolute absence of limits. Since COVID is the reason I work from home, my home office is a place of holiness. Apparently, Lexi missed the memo. I was at a business meeting when she stormed into my office wearing a bikini. With the camera turned on, everyone followed me closely, completely unaware of the disastrous situation she was creating for her career. Enough said about being embarrassed. And there is the matter of their dogs. Hermes and Gucci aren't even housebroken. The twins don't bother tidying up after them, and they scatter little surprises all over the area. These canines are cruel in addition to being dirty. In particular to Moxie, my Cocker Spaniel. One of their nips ended up leaving a scratch on her arm. Not nice. And this wild cake's frosting. They made the wise decision to relocate all of the family portraits. Pictures of my mother, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and even my infant up in the attic without my consent. Simply removed all of these memories and put them elsewhere as if they had no significance. After spending a whole day returning everything to its proper place, it happened once more a few days later. 2 days ago, staff members repeated the action, but this time, she substituted her images with those of her family, the twins, and herself. Stefan. I got into a furious fight about it. I informed her that her daughter needed to learn how to knock on doors and educate their dogs to use the toilet, and that she could not make any changes to the decor or other aspects of my home without my permission. She claimed they were free to do as they pleased in her home, and that she would be creating house rules that we would all have to abide by. Since she believes that I am such a feral beast, I can do everything I want. To say I was furious would be an understatement, given that I was reared improperly as a result of having a horrible, ineffective mother. I told her that because I'm kicking around, she should pack her stuff and bring her twins. I don't have the authority to force them to leave her home, she replied. I informed her, "You are living under my house, lady," and I quote, "This is my home. It's something my mother gave me. You, your twins, and your pets are trespassing right now. Before I contact the police, get out." That day, once Steph informed my dad what had happened, he left early for home. I gave him my version of events. I said that they were still adjusting to the new residence, which was challenging for them. I told him everything that was wrong with them, but he insisted that we should simply give them some time and that everything would get better. I've put up with all of their nonsense, but enough is enough, I told him. It's enough. He was siding with them and protecting them more. I gave him till the end of the week to decide whether to move out with them or stay. Did I make the correct decision by forcing my dad to choose between his new family and me? I really did give them an opportunity. And for the past few months, I've endured so much of their horrible behavior, which is regrettable because my mother was my breaking point. She would never disrespect her home, which is where both she and I were raised. It's a good idea for you to check the top comments before reading the latest versions. Exactly what came to mind first, giving a nod of agreement. All right. They have a horrible voice. You did what you had to do, girl, and I would have done the same. Conversely, your father needs to get a backbone. She seemed to have him firmly grasped in her grasp. I doubt that getting married without inviting you was even his idea. Simply remove them if that is his decision. Proceed. Not in contact. That type of poison is not what you need in your life. Make sure he is unable to dispute her inheritance of the house in order for them to remain there. People these days, you know, hope things works out well for you. Don't tell the wife about the covert wedding. For 2 years, Daddy Dearest dated, concealing it so well that Obiano had no idea, even though she came up with this concept. My darling father was fully in favor of it. Indeed, it's ridiculous how entitled you, your father's wife, and your stepdaughters are. I'm so happy you got rid of them. Her father is also acting in a really bad way. Everything was done in groups. I tied the knot, didn't inform you? And oh, in my new family, too. Take up residence. He is not being honest, polite, or respectful. If the stepmother had suggested the wedding, I would be shocked. It's especially important not to invite the man's daughter. What the heck is that? First edit. Hi everyone, I really appreciate all of your support and comments. It is quite beneficial, particularly amid all of this chaos. Because I detest confrontation, there are moments when I worry that I come across as a pushover. I'm just not into fighting or arguing. I'd rather keep the peace. So here's some quick information on the situation. A few of you made the really wise suggestion to change the locks on the various rooms in the house. Additionally, I haven't had time to fix the old, rusted gate at the property that has been hanging open forever. Perhaps it's time to investigate that as well. In order to find out if there is a possibility that my dad would try to contest the will, I actually gave the attorney who handled my mom's estate a call. We re-hoping for a successful outcome from our meeting in a few hours. About my dad. Look, he's a good guy. He worked hard to provide for me after my mom passed away. He's never dipped into my funds or asked for financial help for living expenses. He's an engineer, makes a good six-figure salary. So I don't really think he's after my money, but I guess he's just caught up in the fact that someone from his past still finds him attractive at his age. We had a chat about his sudden wedding and why he kept his relationship secret. He told me he wasn't sure how I'd react to him dating his high school sweetheart. To be honest, I was pretty upset at first, especially since I wasn't even invited to the wedding, but I'm trying to get over it since he seems happy. But as for his wife and what her deal is, whether there's any bad blood from the past with my mom or something else that's making her act this way, I don't really know, and I'm not sure I want to dive into that mess. They re-adults. They can handle their own issues. And if they ever run into money trouble, they've got their collection of luxury bags to sell off. Seriously, who needs so many bags that they require a whole closet just to store them? In terms of family, it's pretty much just me and my dad around here. My mom was an only child, and she inherited everything from my grandparents when she passed. Most of it came to me, though. She left some for my dad as well. My dad's side of the family, like my grandparents and my uncles and aunts, they all live about 6 hours away. So day to day, it's just us. Oh, and Moxie, my Cocker Spaniel, is doing great. She's loving the quiet around the house lately and seems really happy. I quote, "I'll keep you all posted as things develop." Again, thanks so much for the support. It means a lot to know I'm not going through this alone. I had a sit-down with Amy, that's not her real name, the lawyer who managed my mom's will this past Saturday. I wanted to clear up any confusion about the will and see if my dad could potentially challenge it. Amy showed me a couple of crucial documents that both my dad and I had signed previously. These documents were basically our agreement acknowledging what was left to each of us, and a promise not to contest the will at any point in the future. Amy also advised that to keep things on the level and avoid any unnecessary legal headaches. It would be wise to give them a 30-day notice to find a new place and move out. With this new information, I felt more secure about where I stood legally, which was a relief. But of course, the drama didn't just stop there. What was supposed to be a quiet dinner between my dad and me ended up being anything but instead of the private chat I had envisioned. Steph and the twins decided it was the perfect time to join us, turning the whole evening into a much bigger affair than planned. During dinner, I decided to lay everything out on the table. I explained that I had spoken to Amy and brought up the details about the house and other related legal matters. I mentioned that they had 30 days to sort themselves out and find another place to live. Steph immediately tried to jump in and object. She seemed ready to argue her point, thinking maybe she could persuade me to change my mind. I wasn't in the mood to drag this out any longer than necessary, so I cut that short. I told her plainly that some issues can't be fixed just by talking or going to family therapy, and that sometimes space is what's needed to sort things out. She suggested that maybe we just needed more time to get to know each other. But honestly, from everything that's happened since they moved in, it's clear they only act like family when they need something from me. I've had enough of the passive-aggressive maneuvers and the manipulative tactics, so I straight up asked my dad what his plans were. Was he going to move out with them, or did he want to stay? He seemed taken aback and asked if I was kicking him out. I clarified that I wasn't kicking him out. He was free to stay if he wanted, but that I wouldn't be maintaining contact if he chose to leave with Steph and the twins. Steph then stepped in, playing the victim, wondering why I was throwing them out of their house. I had to explain again that this house was mine, inherited from my mom. It appeared to astonish her. Maybe she had convinced herself that we were living in a house that belonged to my dad. Lexi brought up another point. She grumbled about the time of the relocation, pointing out that they were in the middle of finishing up their spring semester and that exams were just weeks away. I sympathized but stayed strong. I answered with a faint smile. Well, you best start searching for a place quickly then. Yesterday, Easter Sunday, I decided to hold a little get-together at my apartment. I asked my boyfriend and his family, along with my two best friends, to come over and celebrate the day. My dad has been attempting to get in touch, begging me to spend the day with him instead. But honestly, the only family I feel like I have right now are my friends and my boyfriend's family. We had a really fantastic experience. Did an egg search. I had a large supper that felt really comfortable and was something I hadn't done in a while, along with some entertaining games. Moving on to the home things. I've been hard at work recording everything in the house that has a value greater than $500. To be sure we had everything listed precisely, I invited several friends over to assist with that. My partner is the only other person with a duplicate key after I replaced all the locks on the doors. I am aware that his middle-class upbringing makes my dad not very proud of him, but that's his issue, not my own. In addition, I hired an expert to establish a complete security system around the house and grounds. It is comforting to have that additional security. In addition, I have a scheduled appointment to discuss fixing and strengthening the fences and gate. Since I entered college, I haven't actually touched the fund my mother left for me. It was intended to aid with living expenses such as tuition and room and board, but considering the circumstances, I felt compelled to use it. I've put all the minor items in a safety deposit box and have securely stashed away all the key family photos and photographs. I also made sure that all important papers are safely stored in a fireproof and watertight safe that I keep in my room, and that requires a key and a passcode to enter. I quote M, making a sincere effort to exercise prudence and heed the advice you guys have been leaving in the comments on my earlier blogs. I really appreciate all of your support. It's quite significant right now. I don't know why my dad is sticking with his new bride and her family instead of his own daughter. It aches. Since he's essentially the only family I have left here, I won't lie. Since I don't get along with his family, I intend to break up with him and his new family as soon as they move out. He can live with his decision since he made it. That's about it for the time being. If anything new occurs or if there's any drama, which, let's face it, there most likely will be, I'll keep you all informed. However, I've come to terms with the fact that, for whatever reason, he values them more than I do. Once again, I appreciate all of your help and good remarks. Realizing I'm not alone in this is quite beneficial. 3 revisions. Once more, hello to all of you. I was by myself in the house 2 days earlier, going through boxes in the attic that smelled like recollections of mustard. Distractedly, I was going through some of my mom's old stuff, which was both a comforting and a painful activity. Amongst piles of her belongings, I discovered her old writing desk, which I had never considered looking into. It was one of those massive old oak antique desks with many drawers and compartments. I found a bundle of letters wrapped with a fading ribbon buried away in the false bottom of a drawer I was tinkering with. The envelope on top was addressed in a handwriting that I recognized. I couldn't pinpoint whose curiosity ignited it, but it wasn't my mom's. I took a seat in the dust and took the letters out. They were signed with simply A.S. and addressed to my mother. At first, I was just perplexed. My mother included, nobody I knew had a name that began with. But as I went on, the background of these messages gradually revealed a dismal and unsettling picture. These were not amiable correspondences. They had a close relationship, replete with admissions and regrets. There was an obvious betrayal in the tone. The more I read, the more the name Steph started to make horrifying sense as the realization set in. The years-long correspondence described a deep connection that had soured. Particularly the most recent ones were laden with regret and sorrow. In her post, Steph talked about how their previous encounter had severely wounded my mother, for which she yearned for an opportunity to repent, but was never given. The last letter, which begged for forgiveness for an unspecified but obviously serious betrayal, was sent about a week before my mom passed away unexpectedly. My pulse was racing as the ramifications of this shocking new knowledge began to sink in. When at last my dad did return home, I was a whirlwind of emotions. I showed the letters to him, the expression on his face upon discovering them in my hands. It was similar to witnessing someone's entire world come apart. He made no attempt to refute it. Everything just poured out. He acknowledged that Steph was, in fact, the letters S. When he was married to my mother, they had an affair years ago, following Mom's death. Eventually, he and Steph got back in touch and resumed their romance, which resulted in their recent marriage, a detail he refrained from telling me because he was afraid. That wasn't all, though. After hearing our argument, Steph thought it was appropriate to share her side of this bizarre tale because she was broke and living on borrowed time and money and had nowhere else to go. She acknowledged that moving in was not so much about asking for forgiveness as it was about survival. All of the extravagance and riches exterior was only that, a facade. Her bank account was a wreck. Her possessions took her life, an accumulation of debt, the twins as well. Having been lured into this house on the pretext of family togetherness, they were as astonished as I was. They felt taken advantage of, trapped between a new, unwelcome family dynamic and their mother's machinations. What does this mean for me now? My boyhood home, where I felt the closest to my mother, had turned into a set for lies and long-kept secrets. The betrayal still seemed as recent as it had been. The despair and rage were too much to handle. I informed everyone, Dad, Steph, and even the twins for whom I had true feelings, that they had to find another place to reside. Their deadline was at the end of the month. Even if they are still there, the house feels different now, empty or in another way. I've been alone myself a lot, attempting to make sense of it all. How treacherous of Steph. The lie from my father. All of it is too much to take in. My question now is, if forgiveness is possible at all, or if it's simply one more compromise in a long series of them. How would you pardon the unpardonable? How can you make peace with the man who deceived not only your mother but also you? Regarding Steph, I am reminded of all that has transpired each time I see her. She seems to be surrounded by lies, and I find it difficult to weigh my desire to comprehend her intentions against the gravity of what she is doing. I appreciate your presence and the guidance and words of support you have given me during what seems to be the lowest point in my life. Every suggestion and comment that I've been reading has been helpful. It does, in fact, to understand that I'm not the only one who feels this way. To be supported by a community when it feels like my own family is disintegrating. What comes next, then? To be honest, I'm not sure. I have to learn what forgiveness looks like, whether it is possible at all, and how to move on from this. Any opinions or guidance would be highly valued. How would you respond to this? If you were in my position, how would you respond? I'm interested in hearing your opinions. Once more, I want to thank you for bearing with me during everything. Right now, your support means the world. Hello, everyone. Since my last post, things have gotten worse, and not in a good way, so get ready for a lengthy read. The level of tension in the house spiked. With Dad, Steph, and the twins packing to move out, it appeared as though things might finally come to an end. The appearance of peace, though, was fleeting, and there was complete commotion when I arrived last Thursday. I had gone for a lengthy walk in an attempt to decompress, something that I'm finding myself in greater need of these days. But considering the circumstances, I wasn't surprised to see a moving truck parked in front of the home when I got closer. Nevertheless, it was. When I entered the house, Steph was supervising movers who were taking care of some of my most priceless family artifacts in addition to their possessions. Things that had been my grandparents and were never intended to be outside of this home. Steph responded to my instant confrontation with what seemed like a slap in the face. She insisted that because they had to move, they should have been allowed to keep some of the furniture. I was shocked by the boldness. In an attempt to mediate the situation, my dad added some rubbish about wanting to save certain things to give their new apartment a more homey feel. Watching them claim fragments of my past and my ancestry as though they were choosing things out of a catalog was strange. Things quickly heated up. I protested that they had no right to seize anything that was mine, especially objects that carried such sentimental importance. The twins then joined in flinging accusations and insults, casting me as the villain in their warped tale. It seemed like I was in some odd parallel dimension where up was down and right was wrong. The movers were caught in the midst, not knowing whose directions to obey. I refused to back down and insisted that they empty the vehicle and return everything to its rightful place. Steph was enraged. With a furious face and a strong tone, she threatened legal action and asserted that they would be paid eventually. My already overwhelming aggravation and fury were compounded by the public humiliation that resulted from the disturbance attracting the attention of numerous neighbors. I'm sure the spectacle will continue to spark neighborhood rumors for several weeks. Eventually, my dad forcibly dragged Steph away and commanded the movers to stop, maybe seeing how out of hand things had gone. The harm was done, but they quickly fled, taking just their personal belongings. In the house, there were a lot of things that were unspoken, felt drier and colder. I observed the vehicle go. I was half relieved they were gone and half afraid of the silence they would leave behind. I'm currently sitting in my living room with the sounds of the day's turmoil all around me. Recalling the battle in every room makes it difficult to be at peace. Since they left, Dad has not returned calls or texts, and it makes me question whether this will ever be the end of our relationship. The twins' final remarks are constantly repeating in my head, serving as a reminder of the gap that has developed between us. I've been considering what to do next. It is obvious that legal defense may be required if Steph chooses to carry out her threats. I quote, "We've been searching for attorneys in case I need to protect my property rights or handle any other unexpected situations Steph may present." I know it's important, but the thought of hiring legal counsel feels like admitting things are worse than I want to accept. I feel so emotionally spent. I feel like I'm going through a relapse of grieving over my family. In what way do you grieve for living persons who have rejected you in favor of worldly possessions? The home seems too huge and too peaceful, and I can't help but stray around. I used to avoid certain rooms in search of a sense of normalcy. I've also begun to consider security. Perhaps it's time to install an alarm system or some cameras. I can't sleep at night because I worry that they could return and continue to assert their rights to what is rightfully mine. It's an additional expenditure and concern, but it has made me feel less secure, and there's the rebuilding after that. How to reestablish confidence, a feeling of place when it's been so severely damaged? More than ever, I'm missing my mother. She was constantly aware of what to do and how to bravely navigate life's choppy waves. I'm making an effort to remember the things Mom taught me, but at the moment, everything just seems too much. That's where I am right now, a less than homely feeling residence, a fractured and dispersed family, as well as an uncertain future. I would appreciate any guidance, any advice you might have on navigating this situation. How can you get over being betrayed? If it seems like everything is broken, how do you rebuild? I appreciate you listening. For showing up, even if it's only via remarks and texts. I really thank each and every one of you. This community has been a lifeline. Hopefully, the next report will provide more positive news. Till then, be careful. Hi to all of you. Maybe, just maybe, we had reached the apex of this whole fiasco, I thought, after the last post with the moving truck and the fight over my family artifacts. I was very wrong. Things bubbled over right when I thought they would start to simmer down. As an alternative. Earlier last week, while I was still trying to get my life back to something normal, another curve was thrown at me. Apologies. We'll simply refer to it as complicated. I got this terrifying official letter that seemed like it belonged in a legal drama. Steph has made the decision to sue me, and it looks like my dad is on her side. The assertion that, as a result of their supposed mental pain and maintenance of my house during their short visit, they should receive a share of my fortune. It is absurd. They simply made my stress levels spike and gave me a headache that seemed to go on forever. I contacted my dad right away to ask him about the letter. There was a lot of quiet on his end during the uncomfortable chat. He sought to minimize the whole event, saying that Steph was just being theatrical and that when everyone had cooled down, everything will be okay. It seemed as though he was downplaying how serious the matter was. Perhaps he is simply too engrossed in his new romance to be objective. It didn't stop there, though. The twins, who had been notably quiet until now, made the decision to enter the battle. They began sending me a constant stream of SMS, all of them more accusing than the previous Dot. They said I was destroying their family and took responsibility for their mother's anguish. It was astounding how bold they were. They even had the audacity to inquire about dropping over to get some neglected personal belongings, which, strangely enough, included a number of my mother's most treasured and expensive antiques. They have obviously adopted Steph's strategy of distorting the facts. The following day was even more unexpected. I heard a tap on the door and discovered Steph and my father there, unexpected and uninvited. They were trying to have this conversation, but Steph was talking most of the time and my dad was just nodding along. Steph was attempting to manipulate me into complying with their requests by putting on a lot of pressure. She described how difficult this was for each of them and made hints that my refusal to share the estate's wealth was irrational. My father hardly said anything, simply repeated Steph's opinions whenever he spoke. I remained firm. I informed them that, especially in light of the legal threat, they had no right to knock on my home and demand something. In reaction, Steph was irate and even more menacing, threatening to use their lawyer. The argument went on until I eventually threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. I experienced a strange mixture of relief and uneasy dread as I watched them leave. Even though this was my father, I felt as like I was staring at a stranger. I quote now put myself in a situation where I have to get legal advice, a move I never thought I would take against my own family. I can't, however, ignore Steph's aggressiveness or the possible legal implications of her assertions. It is exhausting. This defensive posture all the time, and instead of being a haven, it's making my house a battlefield. I've been looking for quiet moments in the midst of all this chaos. I attempt to bury myself in reading throughout the nights as a short-term stress reliever. Friendship calls serve as a bulwark, a reminder that life exists beyond the storm. But the truth is, I become nervous every time I hear a knock on the door. Every time I get a call from an unknown number, I start to fear more terrible news. I quote, "We've been thinking a lot about how things came to be in this situation. It's obvious that my connection with my dad has changed significantly, maybe irreversibly. My idol, the guy who reared me, suddenly appears to have put Steph's relationship before his own daughter. I have to deal with the legal complications of their requests, while also dealing with sentiments of betrayal, which is a terrible pill to take. I quote, "We also been forced to consider family and inheritance as a result of this circumstance. My beloved home, which brought back memories of my mother and earlier generations, is now the subject of a court dispute and a disputed area. It serves as a sobering reminder that family disputes can occasionally extend beyond interpersonal arguments and include legal issues. I quote, requesting your counsel and insights once more at this point. Has anybody else handled legal disputes inside the family, particularly those concerning estates and inheritance? What got you through it, and how did you handle it? We welcome any and all advice." Since my last post, Steph and my dad have been threatening legal action and saying they should receive a portion of my mom's fortune. A remarkable change of events occurred in the courtroom. Thankfully, the court rejected the case outright after seeing through the ridiculousness of their arguments. Having the court system confirm what I had been feeling all along, that their accusations were utterly baseless and absurd, was a big relief. That ought to be the end of it, right? Not quite, though. There were yet more shocks in life. Let's go back 2 months. The commotion had subsided, and I was starting to believe that perhaps I could at last put the family turmoil behind me and begin to recover. I had the shock of my life at that point. My dad unexpectedly shows up at my house, but he wasn't only stopping by. Everything he had was with him. Suitcases, bags, you name it. I was shocked beyond belief. As I stood there taking in all of his possessions, I couldn't help but feel both confused and worried. I asked him directly what had transpired. He appeared to be defeated, greater than any previous time I've seen him. Him informed me that Steph and him were divorcing. As it happened, Steph had been unfaithful to him. When he confronted her after catching her red-handed, she threw him out of their home. Considering all that had happened, I couldn't help but feel irony. It was shocking to see him this broken, though. Standing there, my dad appeared to be a shadow of the man he once was. He was almost humble in his apology. He requested if he might remain with me for a while, saying he had nowhere else to go. I'll be honest. I wanted to slam the door in his face because of all the suffering he had brought about. However, there may be another part of me that, before all of this chaos, still thought of him as my father. I had compassion for him. I opened the door for him. That first night, we had a lengthy, difficult conversation. He talked candidly about everything. How Steph's relationship soured after their honeymoon period. How he felt stuck in a marriage where true love was secondary to convenience and Steph's manipulation. He had a lot of regrets, particularly about his handling of the estate and me. This was a lot to take in after hearing. On the one hand, I was relieved that Steph could now see what was really going on. However, I felt betrayed and upset that it required this for him to see what I had been going through the entire time. With him here, the home feels different. There's a persistent uneasiness and a tension in the air. We quote, both attempting to figure out how to proceed while navigating this new dynamic. I've laid up certain guidelines for his visit, making it clear that it's only going to be short. If I want any kind of connection with you in the future, I also demand that you take us to family therapy. To process all the sorrow and betrayal, we require expert assistance. It's peculiar, you're aware? A part of me waits for the other shoe to drop and is wary. I'm wondering whether this is simply another cruel joke from life. However, a part of me wishes that perhaps this is another opportunity for us to make amends, to reassemble anything from the ruins of our history. In the meantime, my practical side is also quite active. In order to make sure that there are no unresolved legal issues pertaining to the lawsuit that was dismissed, I have been speaking with attorneys. In addition, I'm investigating ways to safeguard the estate and myself in case any unexpected shocks arise. I'm at that point right now, searching for a middle ground between being cautious and being hopeful, between closing my heart and opening it, just enough to allow for some recovery. I'm taking things day by day, and it's not easy. I appreciate your patience while I've gone through this crazy. Your guidance and assistance have been very helpful. I'm open to hearing from anyone who has experienced something like or who has advice on handling family reunions following such intense disputes. When trust has been so completely destroyed, how can it be rebuilt? How can you be forgiving of others while yet taking care of yourself? Until the next occasion, I'm wishing you all well and looking forward to many calm days. Story 4. My brother's opulent wedding cost my parents my whole fortune. I made a lawsuit threat. I never imagined having to quarrel with my own family about money while I was growing up. However, here we are. Allow me to introduce the situation. Without a doubt, my great-aunt was the coolest member of our family. In a society where women's educational attainment was mostly unimportant, she decided to modify things since she believed they were really ridiculous. She went to school, attended a university, and eventually became a doctor while living in London with her father. But she didn't stop there. She and her spouse immigrated to the US, where they went on to have a wonderful life. However, the fact is that she never lost sight of her origins or the struggles faced by the women in our family. She saw how everyone behaved as though girls could get married, have children, and stop at that. They didn't even need to attend school. That made no sense to my great-aunt. So even though no one else gave a damn, she used her own money to open savings accounts for all of her nieces and grandnieces so that we would at least have a chance to attend college. She had a genuine belief in us, which I always found to be fairly incredible. She left enough money when she died so that all the girls in the family could at least begin their schooling. It was an easy strategy. That money would help us advance in life and be used for college. It served as a safety net for my sister and myself. However, it didn't seem to bother my sister at all. 2 years after graduating from high school, she got married and had no interest in attending college. All right, with her, I suppose I was unique. After putting a lot of effort into my studies, I went to the bank to get the money my great-aunt had left me. At that point, everything started to go sideways. Though I had heard tales of individuals being conned out of inheritances or losing them, I never imagined it would happen to me. I recall feeling as though someone had hit me in the gut as I stood there examining the account's balance. About $13,000 remained in the account. While $13,000 is certainly a sizable sum of money, it wasn't anywhere close to what ought to have been there. I sensed a problem. I was aware of the amount my great-aunt had saved. Additionally, it wasn't this. A mixture of dismay and rage welled up within of me. How could it have vanished? That money was almost gone, and I had intended to use it for education. I headed straight home to my folks. Who else, after all, could have accessed the account? It was nonsensical. They conducted themselves as though it were completely unimportant. They informed me up front that they really did need the money, gave a thorough explanation. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. Was the money needed for? It turned out that they had paid for my brother's wedding with it. You know, the extravagant wedding he had a few years back that the whole family was raving about? Yes, they used money from my education fund to cover the cost. I was so angry that I was almost in shock when they informed me. Who merely spends money intended for their children's education on a wedding? Apparently, my parents are the worst. They pretended that my anger about it was irrational. They continued repeating things like your brother's wedding was significant and it was for the family, as if it would somehow make everything better. Regardless of how significant the wedding was, I could not care less. In the first place, it wasn't their money to steal. It was left for me to go to school by my great-aunt, not for them to pay for some extravagant party. I felt duped. To be honest, I had been banking on that money to help pay for my education, but suddenly I was left with just enough money to get by. I was angry with them, angry with my brother, and angry with the whole thing. However, my folks didn't understand. They just dismissed it, acting as though it were no great thing. It seemed as though they thought I would simply accept it and go on. However, I was not going to do that. The fact that they were acting so casually about the whole situation really got to me. They never even offered an apology. It seemed as though they believed they were entitled to that money and that, since it was for family, I should just accept it. It didn't sit well with me, not even near. My parents blew my inheritance on a single-day event, but I had other plans, and they didn't entail taking out a ton of college debt. I realized then that there would never be the same dynamic between my parents and myself. There was no longer any trust. Even glancing at them made me feel enraged. More than anything, I just wanted my money back. I wanted answers. They said that my exaggeration was excessive, that it's best for me to ignore it. However, how could I? Money was not the only factor in this. Respect was at issue. Neither my great-aunt's wishes for me nor myself were respected by them. I was unsure about what to do next. Although I knew it wouldn't help, there was a part of me that wanted to shout at them. They seemed to be oblivious to my feelings. So that's when I decided what to do. I was not going to overlook this. Should they have believed they could simply trample me and escape consequences, they were in error. I had had enough of being the decent child who accepted everything that was thrown at them. I was determined to retaliate, even if it meant defying my entire family. Though I knew I couldn't allow them get away with it, it wasn't going to be simple. They may have believed that I was simply a simple-minded young person who didn't understand how things worked, but they were going to discover how mistaken they had been. In retrospect, I see the incident at the bank as a turning point in my life. That was the instant I understood my parents weren't who I had assumed them to be. Family is meant to support you, but this situation shows that this wasn't the case. Keeping up with the community and making appearances was more important to them than doing what was good for me. If they believed I would just roll over, then I was not going to be silent about it. They believed they knew me well, but they didn't really. I couldn't simply sit there and let it go after learning that my brother's wedding was funded by funds from my college education. I was furious, and there was no way I would allow them to escape punishment for what they had done. The problem is, that's not how my folks saw it at all. They believed that I was exaggerating my situation. They advised me to quit being so theatrical and to calm down. Yes, I was going to simply let it go and not worry about my future being taken. Yes, comma. I do recall sitting down with them following my discovery of the money. I wanted to offer them an opportunity to defend themselves, perhaps even express some regret or acknowledge that they had erred. Maybe they'll apologize, I reasoned. Perhaps they were unaware of how much trouble this would cause me. But no. My dad sat there casually, as though we were discussing a small annoyance. We needed the money at the moment, he says. And it was significant for the family that your brother be married. I looked at him, hoping for a clue that he would notice how strange that sounded. Still, nothing. He honestly believed his explanation would satisfy me. I inquired, "What about my prospects? What about what I required? You never even considered asking me." My mother intervened with the statement, "The family comes first. That garbage has been around all my life. Kin, kin, kin. They truly meant that everyone else needs to cope with my brother's situation, which comes first. I wasn't going to accept it and not fight back. I got up and gave them the truth. You took something from me. I want my money back. It wasn't yours to take. My mom looked stunned for a while, so I suppose they weren't expecting that. But after that, she simply shook her head and muttered, "I'm being selfish." Self-centered? Me? The victim from whom they just took thousands of dollars. The individual who had put in a lot of effort throughout high school to provide me a chance to attend college. Seemingly, they saw me as selfish for sticking up for myself. That quote S, when I understood this could not be fixed. They showed no concern. They refused to acknowledge that what they had done was wrong, and they wouldn't change it unless I made them. And with that, I decided. Then I was through with them in there. I was not going to stay and play happy family any longer if they were not going to act morally. After that, I said nothing more to them. I just went to my room, gathered my belongings, and walked out. I had no grand scheme or anything. I simply knew that I had to leave that house, realizing how little they thought of me. I contacted a buddy to come get me after packing as many clothing as I could squeeze into a bag. I was not going to waste any more time in a home where my importance was obviously non-existent. Leaving that house felt strange. I was feeling relieved, as well as irritated at the same time. It was as if I was free of their nonsense. It was obvious that something was wrong, so I didn't have to act like it was. I felt like I was truly taking charge of my life for the first time the moment I left the house. Naturally, leaving didn't make things better. Not at all. I still needed to decide how I was going to pay for my education. After my parents' withdrawals, I was left with very little in the bank, so I was forced to take out student loans. It was rather difficult to swallow, I must say. I was aware that I would have to spend years repaying those loans, as my parents felt that getting married was more essential than continuing my schooling. I wasn't going to let them win, though, even if I was obligated to pay the loan. I promised myself that if I had to, I would pay for my own education, but I wasn't going to absolve them. They believed they could simply grab my money and call it a day. However, I wasn't going to allow it to occur. I had had enough of being the submissive, silent daughter. I was going to make sure they pay for the way they had wronged me, in the true sense. Thus, when I left home, the situation continued to worsen. After I moved out, I didn't speak to my parents for a long, but I wasn't done with them yet. The money was no longer the only consideration. It was the idea behind it. They believed that since it was for family, they could just steal my education fund and get away with it. I refused to allow them to believe that was okay. My anger increased with further reflection. They didn't even try to make amends or apologize, really. They just thought that I would submit to whatever they decided. But I knew that if I didn't defend myself now, I wouldn't be able to let this go. They believe they can continue to treat me in this manner. I thus made the decision to sue them for the money they stole. That's okay if that's what it needed to get them to reimburse me. I was not going to give up. I shared my plan with a select group of people. I got a range of responses. My pals agreed wholeheartedly. That was the correct thing to do, they all agreed. That I shouldn't allow my parents to take advantage of me and that they were mistaken. However, that's also when things turned messy. That is, when word reached my family. My relatives behaved as though I were the worst person ever. It seemed as though they were more irate over my lawsuit against my parents than they were over my parents' initial theft from me. The call nearly instantly began. Initially, my aunt tried to guilt-trip me into not pursuing the matter further by calling. She answered, "This is family business. You also don't discuss family matters in public." She insisted that I was prioritizing money before family and that I should consider the embarrassment this would cause for everyone. She even tried to get me to alter my views by playing the Respect Your Elders card. I informed her right away. They embezzled from me. It is not the intention to offend anyone. Regaining what is rightfully mine is the goal. That answer didn't sit well with her, and we haven't talked since. But it wasn't limited to her. Uncles, cousins, and even acquaintances I had hardly spoken to before the whole ordeal began phoning and messaging me, advising me to give up the case and consider the family name, as if I should be concerned about our appearance after they betrayed me. The way my parents responded was the worst part. They made no attempt to retract their actions. Rather, they insisted that I was exaggerating, that I ought to let it go, and that we could resolve the issue. I reminded them that before collecting my money, they had to have considered if they wanted to make things work. They made an attempt to reassure me that they would pay me back later, but by then I was not going to believe them. My birthday isn't yesterday.